Hi, I'm Lara, and this is Trope Train Trilogy. Today, I'll be reviewing the graphic novel Monstrous, Volume 1, Awakening, written by Majori Liu and illustrated by Sana Takada. I wanted to start getting into graphic novels because I really love stories, but I have trouble getting into them during college. And let me tell you, this one might have hooked me. Monstrous is a steampunk fantasy horror, and you might not have known you wanted this, but let me tell you, you want this, because this graphic novel was amazing. Monstrous takes place in an alternate world divided between the Arcanics and the humans. The Arcanics seem to be ruled by the Ancients, while the humans are ruled by ruthless witch nuns. It takes place during a stalemate of the war between the humans and Arcanics. The protagonist, Mika Half-Wolf, is a survivor of this cataclysmic war who has lost her arm previously, either due to the harvest or war. It isn't explicitly stated. And though she appears fully human, she is an Arcanic. During the story, she is trying to hunt down the secrets of her past while simultaneously evading those hunting her down. The story starts with her being sold at a slave auction to the humans. This is all while the monster within begins to awaken. She is a really unique protagonist, well-developed, an anti-hero, dark, and if you're looking for a story with a good anti-hero protagonist who can be just as ruthless but also has her morals and good side, I would recommend this one. Now, since this is a graphic novel, I should probably mention the art style. I have to say, I love the art style. I find it absolutely beautiful. It is definitely inspired by the 1920s Art Deco style, which is beautiful. And it also has some Asian-esque stylings, and the clothing is definitely reminiscent of Asian culture. Now, a lot of people say this artwork reminds them of anime. However, overall, I don't really think it looks that anime-esque. I will say, though, that the young child Kippa definitely has an anime vibe, which I actually think is fitting for the kid because it kind of makes her look more adorable, whereas the other ones are slightly more realistic. If you do like anime, you'll definitely like this. If you don't like anime, I still recommend checking this out, but you probably will still like this. One thing I really like is how the art can be both beautiful in the story and creepy and kind of ugly, but in an intentional way. This really allows the story to get to the more horror and dark aspects because this is a story about war and surviving through the tragedies of war. So it really shouldn't always be beautiful. And I think this graphic novel does a good job at combining the beautiful and the creepy and disturbing in a way that flows naturally and creates a sense of awe at the beauty of the artwork in the story while also disturbing the reader for the more creepy moments. So if you're looking for a dark and unique story, I would definitely recommend this. Be warned, it does get pretty gory and pretty dark at times. In fact, sometimes I was shocked by it, though I always liked it because I'm a sick human being. Seriously, I recommend this. Now for my more in-depth but still spoiler-free analysis. I really love this world. One thing about a lot of fantasies I've read is that they use the same creatures like wizards, elves, dragons, and they don't really branch out. This story did not have this problem. This world, the cultures, the creatures were all completely unique and nothing like I've ever seen before. First off, the humans are ruled by witch nuns, which I have not seen any stories where the people are ruled by witch nuns. They are ruthless and brutal women who get their power through the bones of the Arcanics, which unfortunately for her main character, she's available for the harvesting. So starting with the magical creatures, there are the old gods. Second is the ancients, and then there are the Arcanics, like our protagonist and the adorable Kippa, who are half human and half ancient, some of them appearing entirely human, like Maka, or some of them having just some features but not a face of an animal. And then, most importantly, there are talking cats, some of them with multiple tails, like Master Ren. The protagonist, Mika, is awesome. I love how brutal and ruthless she can be while still having pieces of humanity. Not much of it, but it's in there. Her emotional and internal conflict throughout the story is really well done and develops nicely with her struggling with her inner monster and trying to figure out about one thing that happened in her past. She is definitely an anti-hero, which I love me a good anti-hero. In fact, I did a whole video last week on anti-heroes, and I would classify her as the second darkest, which is the unscrupulous anti-hero, if you watch that and know what I'm talking about. You probably don't. And throughout the story, we watch what's currently happening with her and some flashbacks of what had happened with her, which really gives me a good sense of her character. She is definitely my favorite character in the story, and I really enjoyed seeing her journey, and I felt like I got to know her well. There were a lot of villains in the story with very distinct personalities and motivations, and one thing I really liked was how the villains weren't all together on the same side, and even the ones that were technically on the same side, they had different motivations. They didn't all necessarily trust each other. Some of them were using each other or afraid of each other, and I really liked the complexities of the world and how it wasn't just all one side versus the other, and it's pretty much everyone for themselves or their own goals. The plot was super fast-paced, and it takes place over a pretty short period of time. A lot of the events in the story left me shocked. Sometimes it was from a great twist, other times it was just because the story is so brutal. And when there were twists, I thought they were well done. And one thing about graphic novels is that you can kind of see what's happening on the next page. It's not like a book where it's just words and you'd have to read it. So one thing I thought did well was utilizing the page turn. By that I mean you'd be set up for the twist here, and then when you flip the page, it reveals the twist, which I thought was well done. It was good organization and placement, which also gave the twist a great effect, because I have read some graphic novels where it's like, oh, that's a twist, but I saw it before I was supposed to, because they're pictures and it's kind of easy to accidentally see something you're not supposed to. Now, this story is really dark, but one thing I think the story does well to break up the darkness is by giving us some adorable characters to root for, Master Ren and Kippa. However, both of these characters are more than just there to cheer you up. They both have important roles, and also one thing about them is even though they're both adorable, they don't feel campy or out of place in the story. And in fact, sometimes having poor little baby Kippa just makes it slightly more tragic because you know a child's going through this. Overall, I really enjoyed this story and the artwork. I think it's beautiful. I think the story is well done, and I gave it a 5 out of 5 on Goodreads. However, there are still two really small things I would critique. This story has 6 chapters. So all the villains introduced in chapter 1, I was on board, really invested in them. But then it kept introducing villains throughout the whole story, and there were so many villains to juggle. They didn't get as much time on the page as the ones in the original first chapter, so I found myself getting less invested in each villain, which was unfortunate, especially because one of the villains that I didn't really feel as invested for, I think was supposed to be the main villain, who I was kind of just like, meh. And a lot of the later villains I felt like didn't have as distinct personalities and were sort of there just to be obstacles. Another thing that I thought could have been improved was that the story skipped around point of views, which is fine. But when it wasn't centered around Micah or one of the original villains or characters I was introduced to in chapter 1, and when it instead followed around the other villains that I didn't know as well, I wasn't really as invested in what was happening, mostly because I didn't understand who they were or their motivations, despite the fact that they were supposed to be sort of tied in with other characters. So I tended to focus on trying to figure out who was who and how they related to everyone else instead of focusing on the story. However, overall, I love this story and the artwork is magnificent. And if you're looking for a dark story in a unique world with a morally gray protagonist and awesome twists, I highly recommend this graphic novel for you. Later!